Picture this, a single rider, alone in the darkness, the only sound the rhythmic beat of hooves against cold earth. Above, a sliver of moon casts just enough light to outline the dense, shadowy trees crowding the path. In their hand, clutched tight against the chill, is a small, sealed parchment. It doesn't look like much, but within those few inked lines lies a warning of invasion, a plea for alliance, a king's final order, something powerful enough to tilt the balance of power, to save a city or to condemn it. This isn't just a delivery, it's a race against time, against nature, and against the ever-present threat of capture or death. This was the reality for the medieval messenger, a figure who moved silently through the cracks of history, whose courage quite literally shaped the world we know today. We often think of the Middle Ages in terms of grand castles, clashing armies, and powerful monarchs. But behind every great victory, every avoided disaster, every delicate peace, was a network of these determined individuals. They were the human lifelines of empires, the nervous system of kingdoms at war. Without satellites, without radios, without even reliable roads, the fate of nations rested on the speed, the wit, and the sheer bravery of a person on a horse, or often just on foot. They were scribes, knights, monks, and sometimes even ordinary peasants, bound by a common duty to get the message through, no matter the cost. Their stories are not just tales of adventure, they are profound lessons in resilience, a masterclass in how to survive and succeed when the odds are stacked impossibly against you. In this video, we are going to step into their world. We will travel with them along those dangerous roads, feeling the same fear and the same fierce determination. We'll uncover the ingenious strategies they used to outsmart bandits and enemy patrols, the secret codes they carried, and the hidden networks of safe houses that offered a few hours of rest. We'll meet the women who used societal expectations to their advantage, and the men who forged alliances with the very landscape itself to navigate unseen. This is a journey to the crossroads of war and danger, to a time when information was the most valuable and most vulnerable currency. So join us as we uncover the gripping stories of these unsung heroes and discover how their legacy of courage and duty still echoes in our world today. So who were these individuals who shouldered such an immense responsibility? They were not a single, uniform group. The title of messenger could fall upon a wide array of people, each chosen for a specific purpose. Often, they were humble scribes or clerks from a royal court, literate men who could be trusted to understand the weight of the words they carried. At other times, they were knights or men-at-arms, chosen for their combat prowess and ability to fight their way out of trouble. And in many cases, they were monks or other religious figures, whose clerical robes and presumed neutrality could offer a layer of protection while traveling through lands torn by conflict. What bound them together was not their station in life, but their unwavering reliability. A king or a general was entrusting them with the most valuable commodity in the medieval world: information. In an age devoid of instant communication, these men and women literally were the system. A single, successfully delivered piece of parchment could orchestrate the movement of an entire army, prevent a needless battle, or secure a vital alliance. Conversely, a message lost, delayed, or intercepted could mean catastrophic defeat, the fall of a city, or the death of thousands. The chronicler Jean Froissart, whose works detailed the 100 Years' War, understood this perfectly. He often highlighted the actions of these couriers, noting how the fate of campaigns hinged on their speed and discretion. They operated almost entirely in the shadows, their names rarely recorded in the Grand Chronicles alongside the kings and generals they served. Yet without their silent, dangerous work, the gears of history would have ground to a halt. They were the indispensable lifelines, the nervous system of any kingdom, carrying the urgent thoughts and commands that shaped the destiny of nations. But with such immense trust placed in them came a world of constant, grinding danger. Every journey was a gamble with death, and the road itself was a gauntlet of ever-present threats. Beyond the well-traveled merchant paths, the routes these messengers took were often deliberately obscure, uncharted forest trails, treacherous mountain passes, or lonely stretches of coastline. Kings and commanders would purposefully avoid established roads to throw enemies off the scent, meaning the messenger was frequently navigating by memory, by the stars, or by sheer instinct. There were no detailed maps to consult, no signs to follow. A wrong turn could mean days lost, or worse, delivering oneself straight into the hands of those who would pay dearly for the secrets they carried. And those hands were everywhere. Bandits and highwaymen lay in wait along known choke points, preying on any solitary traveler. For a messenger, the prize was not just a purse of coins, but potentially a ransom or valuable intelligence to be sold to the highest bidder. Capture by enemy forces was an even grimmer prospect. Interrogation, torture, and execution were common fates for those caught carrying sensitive military dispatches. The threat was so pervasive that messengers had to be constantly vigilant, their ears tuned to the slightest snap of a twig in the woods, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement that seemed out of place. The environment itself was a hostile force. A sudden summer storm could turn a gentle stream into a raging torrent, impossible to cross. A harsh winter blizzard could obscure a path completely, leaving a rider and his horse to succumb to the cold. There were no weather forecasts, no shelters at regular intervals. Survival depended on hard-won survival skills and the ability to read the landscape for signs of impending trouble. Then there were the wild animals, wolves and bears in the deep forests of Europe, or other predators elsewhere, that saw a lone traveler as easy prey. Disease was another silent stalker. A simple infected cut or a bout of fever caught from contaminated water could be a death sentence far from any help. One chronicle from the 13th century tells the story of a royal courier named Elias, tasked with carrying a warning of a planned rebellion to a distant castle. Choosing a little-used path through a dense woodland to avoid a known baronial ambush, his horse went lame, throwing him to the ground and breaking his arm. For 2 days he navigated on foot, delirious with pain and hunger, using the flow of streams to guide his direction. He eventually stumbled upon a charcoal burner's hut. The family, though poor and fearful, recognized the king's seal on his person and sheltered him. With his one good arm, Elias helped the man repair a broken cart, and in return, the charcoal burner hitched his old donkey and carried the injured messenger the final 10 miles to the castle gates. The message was delivered just in time, and the rebellion was quashed before it could begin. Elias's story is a perfect testament to the reality of their work. Success relied not just on speed, but on an incredible reservoir of resilience, adaptability, and the occasional, crucial kindness of strangers. Every journey was a story of its own, a relentless test where courage wasn't a grand gesture, but the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. Faced with such overwhelming danger, the medieval messenger's greatest weapon was often not a sword, but their own cleverness. Their first and most vital strategy was a masterful use of disguise and deception, transforming themselves into someone entirely unremarkable to slip through the most watchful of checkpoints. In a world where everyone was suspicious of outsiders, The key to survival was to become invisible by blending perfectly into the background. A royal courier in fine clothes on a warhorse was a gleaming target, but a humble pilgrim, a dusty merchant, or a destitute beggar was just another face in the crowd, beneath the notice of guards and bandits alike. This art of camouflage required deep observation and an understanding of human psychology. A messenger had to know the specific gait of a tired pilgrim, the particular complaints of a merchant about road tolls, or the convincing humility of someone asking for alms. It was a performance where a single misstep, a single out-of-place accent, or an incorrect detail on a forged travel pass could mean discovery and failure. The deception extended far beyond their clothing and mannerisms to the messages themselves. These precious documents were rarely carried openly. The true genius lay in the hiding places, turning ordinary, everyday objects into secret vessels. A message could be carefully rolled and sealed inside a hollowed-out staff, the kind any traveler might lean on. It could be baked inside a loaf of bread to be consumed by the rightful recipient. Some chronicles tell of messages written on thin silk and then sewn into the lining of a cloak or a hat, completely undetectable to a casual search. There are even accounts of messages being written on the clean, thin skin of a shaved head, allowed to heal over briefly, and then covered again as the hair grew back, a living, breathing letter that could only be read upon a second, very careful shaving. This constant innovation in concealment was a silent arms race against those who sought to intercept them. One particularly striking example of this psychological ingenuity comes from the wars between English and French forces. A messenger, knowing he had to pass through a town firmly held by the enemy and rife with checkpoints, devised a truly daring disguise. He acquired the rags of a leper and covered his skin in a mixture of flour and ash to simulate the disease's disfiguring marks. He then took a clapper bell, the universal symbol warning of his supposed condition, and began to shuffle through the town gates. The guards, like everyone else in that era, were terrified of the highly contagious illness. They didn't just wave him through, they actively recoiled, shouting at him to move along quickly and get far away from them. His very vulnerability, his apparent weakness, became his ultimate shield. He passed through uncontested not because he was strong, but because he presented himself as someone to be avoided at all costs. This strategy required immense mental fortitude and adaptability. A messenger had to be a quick-thinking actor, ready to switch roles at a moment's notice. They needed to assess a new town or a group of fellow travelers instantly and adjust their story and behavior to fit in seamlessly. It was a taxing psychological game, living a lie for days or weeks on end, constantly watching for any sign of suspicion. This mastery of disguise wasn't just about putting on a costume. It was about becoming another person entirely, burying their own fear and anxiety beneath a carefully constructed layer of deception to ensure that the all-important message and the future it carried reached its destination. But carrying a message in a clever hiding spot was only half the battle. If discovered, the contents would be laid bare for any enemy to read and exploit. This is where the medieval messenger's role transformed from mere courier to cryptographer, relying on a second, deeply intellectual layer of defense, the art of coded messages and ciphers. Imagine the immense pressure of knowing that even if you were captured and searched, the secret you carried could remain safe, locked behind a linguistic puzzle that only one other person in the world could solve. This wasn't just about physical bravery, it was a test of mental ingenuity, a high-stakes game of wits played against some of the most powerful adversaries in history. The methods they used were remarkably sophisticated for their time. One of the most common was the substitution cipher, where each letter in the alphabet is replaced by another according to a pre-arranged key. For instance, a simple shift cipher, often attributed to Julius Caesar but used for centuries after, would replace each letter with the one 3 places down, so A becomes D, B becomes E, and so on. To an untrained eye, the resulting message looked like complete gibberish, but for the intended recipient who possessed the key, it was a simple matter to reverse the process and reveal the vital intelligence within. Another ingenious method was the use of invisible ink. Messengers would often write an innocuous, everyday letter, a recipe, a shopping list, a bland piece of correspondence using ordinary ink. Then, between the lines or in the margins, they would pen the true message using a special ink made from lemon juice, milk, or even onion juice. When dried, this writing would be completely invisible. Only when the document was gently heated over a candle flame would the organic compounds in the secret ink caramelize and turn brown, causing the hidden words to magically appear before the reader's eyes. The true strength of these systems, however, lay in their personalization. Kings and their spymasters didn't rely on common, easily breakable codes. They developed unique ciphers that were shared only between specific pairs of correspondents. A code used between the English king and his field commander in France would be useless to a French agent who intercepted a message meant for a Spanish ally. This personalized approach meant that even if one cipher was broken, the entire communication network wasn't compromised. It created a web of secret languages, each a tiny, isolated fortress of information. We see brilliant examples of this during the tumultuous 100 Years' War. Both English and French sides employed teams of clerks dedicated solely to devising and breaking these codes. They understood that winning a war was as much about controlling information as it was about winning battles on the field. A successfully intercepted and decoded message could reveal enemy troop movements, warn of an impending attack, or expose a traitor within one's own ranks. The value of that intelligence was incalculable. Historians who study medieval cryptography point out that these efforts were the direct precursors to modern espionage techniques. The basic principles of encryption and secure communication established by these medieval messengers, complexity, personalization, and constant evolution to stay ahead of the codebreakers, are the very same principles that underpin our digital security today. It was a raw, early form of information warfare. This aspect of their job required a different kind of courage. It was the intellectual bravery to trust in a system, to believe that a sheet of seemingly random symbols could protect not only the message but also the messenger's own life. They carried with them the immense responsibility of being the sole physical link in a chain of trust between two minds separated by miles of hostile territory. Their success ensured that even in a world of treachery and violence, a secret could still be kept. Yet even the most brilliant disguise or unbreakable code was useless if a messenger was lost, ambushed, or simply didn't know the hidden ford across a river or the secret pass through the mountains. This is where a third, profoundly human strategy came into play, the forging of alliances with local guides. In a world without detailed maps, the most valuable resource wasn't a better weapon or a faster horse, it was knowledge. And that knowledge was held by the people who lived on the land, the innkeeper who heard every rumor from travelers, the shepherd who knew every sheep trail on the hillside, or the woodsman who could navigate the deepest forest by the moss on the trees. For a messenger operating in hostile territory, these individuals were more than just helpful locals. They were indispensable partners in survival, the difference between a successful delivery and disappearing without a trace. The relationship was a delicate dance of mutual benefit, a transaction built on more than just coin. A local guide offered their priceless, intimate knowledge of the landscape. They knew which roads were being watched, which bridges were washed out, which farmer might offer a hayloft to sleep in for the night, and which village inn was loyal to the other side. In return, the messenger could offer things the local might desperately need: protection, as a well-armed courier could deter bandits, valuable information from the wider world, or, of course, hard currency. For a poor woodsman or a struggling farmer, the payment for a single night's guided journey could feed a family for a month, but the exchange often went deeper. Sometimes the guide was a secret sympathizer to the messenger's cause, a patriot working not for pay but for the promise of liberation from an oppressive lord or foreign invader. This shared purpose created a bond far stronger than any business arrangement, turning a simple guide into a co-conspirator in a dangerous game. Consider the story of a French messenger during the Albigensian Crusade, tasked with warning a Cathar stronghold of an approaching papal army. The main roads were crawling with Crusader patrols, so he had to cut through the dark, trackless heart of the Black Mountain. For 2 days, he wandered in circles, his horse growing increasingly nervous as wolves howled in the distance. On the verge of despair, he stumbled upon the isolated hut of a charcoal burner, a man named Pons. Initially wary, the messenger saw no other option but to trust him. He showed Pons not a royal seal, which would mean nothing to such a man, but a token, a small, carved wooden dove given to him by a Cathar preacher he had once helped. Pons's eyes widened in recognition. The dove was a symbol of peace and resistance among the persecuted Cathars. Without a word, Pons nodded. That night, he led the messenger along paths no horse could follow, trails known only to hunters and outlaws. They moved in utter silence, the woodsman pointing out a recently disturbed patch of earth where a Crusader patrol had camped just hours before. By dawn, they had bypassed the entire enemy cordon, and the messenger was on a clear path to the fortress. He offered Pons payment, but the woodsman refused, simply saying, "Tell them we are still here." This was the true value of a guide, not just a path through the woods, but a path through the political and human landscape, navigated by trust. But this trust was a double-edged sword. The potential for betrayal was a constant, chilling threat. An enemy lord could offer a much larger reward than a messenger could ever carry, or a guide might be coerced through threats to their family. Assessing trustworthiness was therefore one of the messenger's most critical skills. It was a rapid, high-stakes evaluation based on subtle cues: the tone of voice when discussing the local lord, the condition of their home, were they struggling or suspiciously prosperous, the look in their eyes when shown a token or seal. Messengers often relied on pre-arranged safe houses within a network, places vouched for by their superiors. But when operating independently, they had to trust their gut instinct, a sense honed by experience and survival. A wrong choice didn't just mean failure. It meant a trap, an ambush waiting in a narrow gorge or a quiet cottage. This strategy fundamentally redefines our image of the lone, heroic messenger. He was rarely truly alone. His success was built upon a hidden web of ordinary people, the forgotten, the overlooked, the people who never made it into the history books. It was a collaboration that stretched across social classes, from the royal court to the deepest forest, a silent partnership between the center of power and its furthest edges. This network of trust turned the messenger's journey from a solitary ordeal into a relay of human solidarity, where courage was not just about individual bravery, but about the ability to connect, to earn trust, and to place one's life in the hands of another. It was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, in the midst of war and danger, communities could form in the shadows, bound together by a common cause and the shared risk of doing what was right. While cunning and covert alliances were essential for survival, there were moments in medieval geopolitics that demanded not stealth, but sheer, breathtaking speed. When a castle was under siege and its defenders were down to their last sacks of grain, or when two allied armies needed to coordinate a pincer movement across hundreds of miles, a message could not afford to meander through forests or wait for the cover of darkness. It needed to fly, and to achieve this impossible velocity, kingdoms developed one of the most sophisticated logistical systems of the pre-modern world, the messenger relay. This was not a strategy of individual heroism, but of orchestrated, institutional power, a testament to how empires could turn the relentless endurance of the human spirit into a precise, well-oiled machine. The principle was brilliantly simple, yet its execution was monumentally complex. Instead of one exhausted rider and one horse covering an entire, grueling distance, the journey was broken down into stages. At predetermined points along major royal roads or strategically vital routes, a network of stations was established. These were often simple stables or fortified inns known as post houses. Here, a winded messenger galloping in on a lathered, foam-flecked horse could leap from his saddle and onto the back of a fresh, rested mount that was already saddled and waiting. In some of the most advanced systems, the message itself could be transferred to a fresh courier, a man who was local to that area and knew the next leg of the journey intimately. This meant that the physical package of information never had to stop moving. It could travel at a sustained gallop day and night, covering distances in a matter of days that would have taken a single rider weeks. The organization behind this network was a staggering feat of medieval administration. Maintaining these routes required immense resources. The post houses had to be stocked with fodder for the horses, food and basic lodgings for the riders, and staffed by stable hands and a station master, all of whom were paid from the royal treasury. The horses themselves were a special breed, not the heavy destriers of the night, but lighter, swifter palfreys or coursers, chosen for their speed and stamina. These routes became the vital arteries of an empire, and their security was paramount. They were often patrolled by royal guards to keep them clear of bandits, and their upkeep was a constant financial drain that only the most powerful and organized states could afford. It was the ultimate symbol of a kingdom's reach and control, a physical manifestation of its power stretching across the landscape. Perhaps the most famous early example of this system was implemented by Charlemagne in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. His empire, which stretched across much of Western Europe, was simply too vast to govern without rapid communication. His capitularies or decrees detail the establishment of a network of veridarii, mounted couriers who operated along fixed routes. They were granted special privileges to requisition fresh horses and supplies from local villages, a clear indication of the system's importance to the central authority. Charlemagne understood that to hold his sprawling domains together, his will had to travel faster than the speed of rebellion or invasion. This relay system allowed him to respond to crises on distant frontiers, coordinate with his counts and bishops, and project his power in a way that was unprecedented for his time. It was in many ways the internet of the Carolingian Empire, and its efficiency was a key reason for its stability. For the individual riders working this relentless system, the physical and mental toll was almost beyond comprehension. While they might not ride the entire distance, the leg they were responsible for was a flat-out sprint. They rode in all weather, blistering heat that baked the roads into dust, and driving rain that turned them into quagmires of clinging mud. They rode through the night, guided only by the moon and their knowledge of the road, with the ever-present risk of their horse stumbling in a pothole and sending them both crashing to the ground. There was no time for proper meals. They ate hardtack biscuit, dried meat, and perhaps a handful of nuts while still in the saddle, washing it down with gulps of water from a skin. Sleep was a luxury snatched in brief, uncomfortable moments at a post house before the next urgent message arrived, demanding immediate departure. This was a life of profound sacrifice, a constant battle against the absolute limits of human and animal endurance. Theirs was a different kind of courage. It wasn't the sharp, acute fear of an ambush, but a slow, grinding exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that became their constant companion. They were chosen not just for their riding skill, but for their iron will and unwavering discipline. The success of the entire empire's communication network hinged on their ability to push through pain, through exhaustion, through the overwhelming desire to simply stop and rest. They were the unsung cogs in a magnificent machine, their individual identities often lost to history, but their collective effort was what kept kingdoms connected, informed, and ultimately secure. The relay system shows us that medieval communication at its peak was a marvel of logistics and human perseverance, a powerful reminder that speed itself was a weapon, and these men were the ones who wielded it. But when a messenger was truly on their own, far from any relay station or friendly village, their most reliable companion was not a person or a horse, but the very land itself. Without the maps we take for granted today, these travelers had to become living, breathing cartographers, reading the world around them with an intimacy we can scarcely imagine. Their fifth essential strategy was a profound mastery of natural navigation, using the stars, the rivers, the mountains, and the subtle whispers of the wilderness as their guide. This was not a mere skill, it was a deep, generational wisdom, a symbiotic relationship with the environment that often meant the difference between life and a lonely death in an uncharted forest. The night sky was their most constant and trusted roadmap. In an era before pervasive light pollution, the heavens were a brilliant, swirling tapestry of constellations. The North Star, Polaris, was their anchor point, a fixed celestial beacon around which all other stars seemed to rotate. By finding it, a messenger could always determine true north, providing a constant bearing even on the cloudiest of nights when just a sliver of sky was visible. But their knowledge went far beyond a single star. They understood the seasonal movements of the constellations, how the Great Bear dipped lower in the sky as winter approached, or how the summer triangle dominated the warmer months. This celestial calendar allowed them to gauge not only their direction but also the time of year, which was critical for anticipating the conditions ahead. A messenger setting out in autumn, for instance, knowing the days were growing shorter, would push harder to cover more ground in the precious daylight hours. On the ground, the landscape itself told a story to those who knew how to read it. A fast-flowing river could be a highway, its course often leading toward settlements or fording points known to local folk. The moss growing thick on the north side of an ancient oak tree offered a rough compass when the sun was hidden. The very shape of a valley or the specific type of heather growing on a hillside could signal to a trained eye that they were nearing a particular region or had veered dangerously off course. This knowledge was often passed down orally from experienced couriers to their apprentices, a priceless library of environmental clues that was memorized, not written down. They learned to recognize the signs of impending weather shifts, how a certain halo around the moon foretold rain, or how the behavior of birds could indicate a coming storm long before the first dark clouds appeared on the horizon. This allowed them to seek shelter before being caught in a deadly downpour or a blizzard, or to make for high ground if they suspected a river might soon flood its banks. One particularly compelling story involves a young messenger named Alard, tasked with carrying a treaty between two rival dukes in the dense Ardennes forest. A sudden, thick fog descended, reducing visibility to mere feet and utterly disorienting him and his horse. His map was useless, a mere drawing of lines he could no longer correlate with the unseen world around him. For hours he wandered in circles, the silence of the fog playing tricks on his mind. Just as panic began to set in, he remembered an old trick his mentor had taught him. He dismounted and laid his ear to the damp ground. At first he heard nothing but his own pounding heart, but then, faint and deep, came a low, consistent rumble. It was the sound of a large mill wheel turning on a river he knew cut through the forest's heart. The sound traveled far through the earth, a vibration imperceptible to someone standing upright. Following that subterranean hum, he slowly picked his way through the blinding fog until he reached the riverbank. From there, he knew to follow the current downstream, which eventually led him to a miller's cottage and the next day back to his correct route. He had navigated not by what he could see, but by what he could hear and feel, a testament to a truly holistic understanding of his environment. Historians emphasize that this environmental wisdom was the bedrock of all medieval travel, not just for messengers but for pilgrims, merchants, and armies alike. It represented a fundamental connection to the natural world that modern technology has largely severed. For the messenger, this resourcefulness was a form of silent, constant dialogue with the landscape. Every rustle of leaves, every bird's call, every shift in the wind carried potential information. It required immense patience, powers of observation, and a humble acknowledgement that humans were not masters of the wilderness, but participants within it. Their ability to listen to the world and interpret its signs was a quiet, profound kind of courage, the courage to trust in nature's patterns when all other guides had failed. This deep, earned intimacy with the earth turned the entire world into their map, a living document written in rivers and stars, in the growth of moss and the behavior of animals, ensuring that even the most solitary traveler was never truly without a guide. Yet for all their clever disguises and trusted guides, the most formidable enemy a messenger ever faced was not waiting on the road or hiding in a forest ambush. It was the enemy within the slow, creeping dread of isolation, the paralyzing grip of fear, and the whispering voice of doubt that could undermine even the most physically prepared traveler. Their sixth, and perhaps most personal, strategy was the cultivation of an unshakable psychological resilience, a fortified mindset that allowed them to press forward when every instinct screamed at them to turn back. This was the inner citadel they had to build and maintain, a mental stronghold as crucial to their survival as any stone castle. Imagine the profound psychological weight they carried. For days, sometimes weeks on end, they were utterly alone with their thoughts. The silence of a moonlit trail was not peaceful. It was a canvas for the imagination to paint every possible horror. Every shadow could morph into an assassin, every rustle in the bushes into the sound of an approaching patrol. This was a constant, low-grade terror that gnawed at their resolve, a battle against their own mind that was fought with every passing mile. Historical accounts, though rare in detailing such intimate struggles, offer glimpses. A chronicler mentioning a courier's steadfast heart in the face of certain peril, or a line in a recovered diary entry that speaks of praying through the long, cold watches of the night, tells us volumes about the inner turmoil they had to master. Their courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the monumental effort to act in spite of it. To build this resilience, they relied on a toolkit of mental and spiritual techniques. For many, faith was their primary bulwark. The rhythmic recitation of prayers, the clutching of a rosary or a small relic, provided a sense of connection to something larger and more stable than their immediate danger. It was a ritual that could calm a racing heart and focus a scattered mind, offering a framework of meaning that transformed a potentially meaningless death into a potential martyrdom or a fulfilled sacred duty. Others may have practiced forms of meditation or mindfulness long before the terms were coined, focusing intently on their breathing or the rhythm of their horse's gait to anchor themselves in the present moment, away from fearful projections of the future. The simple, repetitive physicality of travel itself could become a form of moving meditation, a way to quiet the mind by fully engaging the body. But perhaps the most powerful technique was the simplest, a relentless focus on their mission. They didn't think of themselves as individuals facing impossible odds, but as a single, vital link in a chain of command. The message wasn't just a piece of parchment. It was the trust of their king, the hopes of a besieged garrison, the lives of thousands who depended on its delivery. This sense of duty became a psychological shield. When fear arose, they could deflect it by mentally replaying the moment they received their orders, the gravity in their commander's eyes, the importance of the seal pressed into the wax. Their identity temporarily shifted from a scared man on a dangerous road to the instrument of a king's will. This wasn't just noble idealism. It was a practical cognitive reframing that made the risk feel worth it and the fear manageable. It gave their perilous journey a profound purpose that outweighed the instinct for self-preservation. We can think of their mindset as a well-defended castle. The high, thick walls were their sense of duty and purpose, deflecting the larger assaults of despair. The archers on the battlements were their practiced techniques, prayer, focus, and ritual, picking off smaller worries before they could gain a foothold. And the deep, reliable well within the keep was their core identity and reason for enduring, the fresh water that sustained them through the longest sieges against their own anxiety. This inner fortress didn't make them invulnerable, but it made them incredibly difficult to break. It allowed them to acknowledge the fear, hear its whispers, and then consciously choose to continue forward anyway. This profound inner strength, this mastery of the mind, was the invisible engine of their courage. It was the difference between a messenger who froze at the first sign of trouble and one who took a deep breath, adjusted his disguise, and walked calmly through the enemy's gate. Their greatest journeys were not just across land, but through the treacherous landscape of their own minds. This practice of hiding among pilgrims was a stroke of genius, turning one of medieval Europe's most powerful social currents into a perfect cloak of invisibility. The roads to major pilgrimage sites like Santiago de Compostela in Spain, Canterbury in England, or Rome in Italy were the era's great highways, constantly flowing with a diverse river of humanity from every walk of life. For a messenger, slipping into this river meant becoming just another droplet in the stream, protected by the sheer anonymity of the crowd. A solitary rider was a target, a man in a worn tunic, carrying a staff and a scallop shell, walking alongside dozens of others doing the exact same thing, was practically ghost. The very nature of a pilgrimage provided the ultimate cover story. Pilgrims were expected to be from somewhere else, to be traveling with a sacred purpose that often made them vague about their personal details, and to be poor and humble. This was a persona a messenger could adopt with ease, his genuine travel-worn appearance and need for discretion blending in perfectly with the pious journey of those around him. The practical benefits of this strategy were immense. First and foremost, these well-trodden paths were simply safer. While bandits certainly preyed on pilgrims, the sheer size of some groups could act as a deterrent. More importantly, the routes were dotted with infrastructure built to support this spiritual traffic. Monasteries and hospices that offered free or cheap food and a place to sleep, better maintained roads, and even a degree of protection from local lords who saw the safe passage of pilgrims as a duty. A messenger could conserve his precious funds, rest more securely, and travel much more efficiently by tapping into this ready-made support network. He also gained access to a rolling source of information. Around campfires and in crowded inns, pilgrims exchanged news and gossip from every corner of Christendom. A sharp-eared messenger could pick up valuable intelligence about road conditions ahead, regional conflicts, or even the movements of enemy soldiers, all while maintaining his harmless disguise. A famous example from the 14th century illustrates this perfectly. During a tense period of conflict between the English crown and powerful northern barons, a clerk from the royal court was tasked with carrying a sealed letter to a loyal bishop in York. The direct roads were known to be watched by the baron's men, who were stopping and searching anyone who looked remotely official. The clerk's solution was both simple and brilliant. He joined a large group of pilgrims setting out from London on the long walk to the shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury. He acquired the simple wool robe of a penitent and carefully concealed the crucial letter, not in a pouch, but sewn into the leather binding of a small, well-worn book of hours, a common prayer book carried by any devout traveler. For over a week, he walked and prayed with the group, his royal secret hidden in plain sight. When the party reached Canterbury, he simply broke away after visiting the cathedral, continuing his journey north on a fresh horse he had pre-arranged to have waiting. He had moved through contested territory not by avoiding people, but by immersing himself in the one group nobody would suspect of carrying affairs of state. Of course, this method was not without its own unique set of dangers. The very popularity of pilgrimage routes meant they were also closely watched by the very authorities a messenger might be trying to avoid. Enemy agents knew that the constant flow of people provided excellent cover for spies and couriers, so they would often station their own watchers at key points, city gates, popular inns, and river crossings to scrutinize the crowds. A messenger had to be a flawless actor, maintaining his pious demeanor at all times, asking too many questions about military matters, appearing too well-fed or well-funded despite his humble clothes, or simply failing to perform the expected rituals of pilgrimage could arouse suspicion. Furthermore, the constant companionship was a double-edged sword. While the crowd offered anonymity, it also meant a lack of privacy and the potential for a curious or overly friendly fellow pilgrim to notice something amiss. The greatest risk was at the pilgrimage sites themselves, which were often hubs of political intrigue where various factions kept a close eye on new arrivals. A messenger had to blend in perfectly, then vanish without a trace, a difficult maneuver in a place teeming with people yet under constant observation. This strategy required a different kind of courage, not the bravery of a lone rider facing down bandits, but the steady nerves of a deep-cover agent, maintaining a lie for days on end in the constant company of strangers. While the image of a lone rider on a galloping horse defines our romantic vision of the medieval messenger, some of their most ingenious work was done without a saddle or even a human presence at all. When the risk was simply too great for any person to traverse a battlefield or slip through a siege line, these resourceful individuals turned to the animal kingdom for a silent, swift, and utterly unexpected solution. Their eighth strategy moved beyond the partnership with horses to a far more specialized form of courier, the use of trained animals like carrier pigeons and dogs. This wasn't just a clever trick, it was a sophisticated understanding of animal behavior harnessed for one of the most critical tasks of the era, showcasing a breathtaking level of innovation in the face of impossible communication barriers. The most famous and effective of these animal allies was the humble carrier pigeon. The concept seems almost magical even today. A bird released from a location hundreds of miles from its home could, with unerring accuracy, fly in a straight line to the precise loft where it was raised. Medieval messengers didn't understand the science of magnetoception, the biological ability to sense the Earth's magnetic fields, but they didn't need to. They were brilliant empiricists. They observed that it worked, and they perfected a system to exploit it. The training process, known as loft flying, was a patient exercise in conditioning. Young birds were taken progressively longer distances from their home loft and released. Each successful return reinforced their homing instinct and strengthened their connection to that one specific location. Soon, a network of strategic lofts could be established, one inside a besieged castle, for instance, and another with a relief army camped miles away. A messenger could carry a basket of these feathered couriers to the field commander, creating a one-way communication channel back to headquarters that was faster and more reliable than any human could ever hope to be. The advantages of this system were profound, especially in the context of siege warfare, which was a common and grueling feature of medieval conflict. Imagine a city surrounded by enemy forces, its walls a prison, its inhabitants slowly starving. All traditional routes in or out are sealed shut, watched by thousands of eyes. But a pigeon coop on a high tower within the city was a resource no enemy could completely blockade. A message, written on a tiny slip of lightweight paper or thin parchment, could be rolled into a small tube and attached to the bird's leg. When released, the pigeon would soar high above the enemy camps, an almost invisible speck against the sky, utterly immune to arrows or ambushes. It would fly directly to its home loft, delivering a desperate plea for help, a detailed report on the enemy's positions, or vital intelligence about the defender's weakening condition. The Saracens during the Crusades were noted for their effective use of pigeon posts to coordinate between their scattered forces, and the practice quickly spread to European armies who saw its undeniable strategic value. The pigeon was the closest thing to instant messaging the medieval world ever achieved, a silent, unstoppable dart of information piercing through the most formidable obstacles. But pigeons weren't the only creatures pressed into service. In more localized terrestrial scenarios, dogs were also employed as messengers. Their use was more niche and less documented, but chronicles and tapestries occasionally depict dogs carrying small baskets or tubes around their necks. Their primary advantage was their loyalty, agility, and ability to navigate difficult terrain like dense woods or muddy trenches where a horse might struggle. A well-trained dog could be sent from a forward scouting party back to a main camp with a short, urgent message, using its natural camouflage and speed to avoid detection. They were particularly useful at night or in fog, conditions that grounded pigeons but where a dog's keen senses of smell and hearing gave it a distinct advantage. The limitation, of course, was range and complexity. A dog could only be sent to a location it knew well and to a handler it recognized, making it a tool for tactical, short-range communication rather than strategic, long-distance diplomacy. The brilliance of using animals lay in its elegant overcoming of fundamental human limitations. A pigeon required no food or water for its journey, felt no fear, and needed no rest. It was a pure expression of purpose, a biological machine perfectly designed for a single task. This method also represented a fascinating decentralization of risk. The human messenger's greatest fear was of being caught and the message being discovered. With an animal courier, that risk was almost entirely eliminated. Even if a pigeon was shot down or a dog was caught, the likelihood of the message being found, understood, and successfully intercepted was minuscule compared to a captured human who could be interrogated. It was a strategy that protected not only the information but also the human agents involved, allowing commanders to receive critical updates without continually gambling with the lives of their most skilled couriers. This creative leap, from relying solely on human courage to leveraging the innate abilities of the natural world, is a powerful testament to the medieval mind's capacity for innovation. It reveals a world where every resource, from the stars in the sky to the birds that flew through it, was a potential tool in the endless, high-stakes game of delivering the message. Sometimes the most direct path to a destination was the most dangerous one, and the smartest play was not to hide, but to perform a grand and convincing deception right under the enemy's nose. This ninth strategy elevated the messenger's role from that of a discreet courier to a masterful tactician of misdirection, an artist who painted false trails and crafted elaborate illusions to lead their pursuers on a futile chase. It was a dangerous, high-stakes game of psychological chess, where the goal was not merely to avoid the opponent, but to actively control their movements, to waste their time and resources, and to make them see a threat where none existed, all while the true prize slipped through their fingers unnoticed. The planning behind these operations was often as complex as a military campaign itself. It required meticulous coordination with a network of allies, each playing a pre-assigned role in the grand performance. A messenger might arrange for a confederate to loudly boast in a tavern about a crucial message being sent south at dawn, ensuring the rumor reached the right ears. Meanwhile, the actual messenger carrying the genuine dispatch would be quietly slipping out of a northern gate under the cover of darkness. In other cases, they might employ a double, another rider dressed in a similar fashion and carrying a convincing-looking decoy message to draw the main force of any pursuers away from the true courier's path. The decoy message itself was a work of art, often containing just enough plausible but ultimately useless information to make the interception seem like a major victory for the enemy, further cementing their belief that they had thwarted the real plot. This level of coordination turned a solitary mission into a team effort, a symphony of deception where every note had to be perfectly timed. A legendary story from the War of the Roses perfectly captures the sheer audacity of this tactic. A Lancastrian messenger was tasked with carrying plans for a surprise attack on a Yorkist stronghold. He knew the Yorkists had spies everywhere and that the direct route would be watched. So he devised a plan worthy of a stage magician. He first had two other riders depart on different, more obvious routes, each carrying a sealed letter filled with false information about a planned attack from the west. As expected, both were quickly caught by Yorkist patrols, while the enemy commanders were congratulating themselves and shifting their troops to meet the western threat. The real messenger made his move. But he didn't simply take a hidden path. Instead, he boldly rode directly through the main Yorkist camp itself, disguised not as a peasant, but as a Yorkist dispatch rider. He wore stolen colors and carried a forged letter with a fake Yorkist seal, authorizing his passage. He even stopped to water his horse and complained to the guards about the false alarm from the west, further selling the illusion. He moved with such confidence and offered such a perfect performance that he passed through the heart of the enemy's operation without a second glance. The real plans sewn into the lining of his saddle were delivered without a single sword being drawn. The Yorkists were left completely baffled, preparing for an attack that would never come while the real blow was being prepared from an entirely different direction. The psychological impact of this kind of misdirection on an adversary was profound and deeply corrosive. For the pursuers, it created a fog of paranoia and uncertainty. Every intercepted message became suspect. Every traveler could be a decoy. It forced them to waste precious men and time chasing shadows, investigating every possible lead instead of focusing their efforts. This constant state of second-guessing eroded their confidence in their own intelligence and sowed distrust among their ranks. A successful misdirection didn't just protect one message, it poisoned the well for future interceptions, making the enemy hesitant, slow to react, and prone to errors in judgment. It turned their greatest strength, their network of spies and patrols, into a weakness, as it could be so easily flooded with false information. The messenger, in executing this strategy, was doing more than just delivering a letter. They were engaging in a form of psychological warfare, attacking the enemy's command and control by undermining their very trust in information itself. This mastery of deception showcases a level of strategic thinking that goes far beyond mere survival, revealing the medieval messenger as a cunning and sophisticated operative in the long, silent war of secrets. Yet even the most ingenious messenger, skilled in every art of disguise and deception, could not run forever. The physical and emotional toll of constant vigilance was immense, and there were times when the only thing standing between success and capture was a place to simply stop, to breathe, and to feel safe, if only for a few hours. This fundamental human need gave rise to one of the most critical and fascinating aspects of their world: a secret, scattered infrastructure of safe houses and clandestine networks. These hidden sanctuaries were the silent, beating heart of medieval communication, offering not just shelter but hope, and they were sustained not by royal decree, but by the extraordinary courage of ordinary people. These safe houses took many forms, each chosen for its ability to conceal and protect. A remote forester's cottage, deep in a royal wood and known only to a few, could offer a hot meal and a bed of straw away from prying eyes. A sympathetic monastery, with its labyrinthine corridors and sacred vow of hospitality, could hide a traveler in a secluded cell, their presence unknown even to most of the brothers and sisters within. Some networks utilized natural formations, a specific cave behind a waterfall, a hidden hollow in an ancient, gnarled oak as dead drops for messages or temporary hiding spots. The common thread was their secrecy. These were places deliberately off the map, their existence a closely guarded secret passed only to those who had earned absolute trust. Within these walls, a messenger could finally lower their guard. They could shed their exhausting disguise, tend to their wounds, feed and rest their horse, and perhaps most importantly, receive the latest intelligence about the dangers that lay ahead on their route. Establishing and maintaining this shadowy network was a monumental task built on the fragile pillars of oath and mutual aid. It was not organized by a central authority with infinite resources, but rather woven together through personal relationships, shared loyalties, and sometimes shared faith or political cause. A local knight whose family had sworn fealty to a particular lord might offer his barn. A village blacksmith who secretly sympathized with a rebel faction could signal with a certain lantern in his window that it was safe to approach. These individuals were bound by solemn oaths, often sworn on a holy relic or before a priest, to protect the secrets of the network with their lives. The reward was rarely monetary. It was the satisfaction of serving a cause they believed in, the protection offered by a powerful patron, or simply the knowledge that they were part of something larger than themselves, a resistance moving silently in the shadows. The bloody conflict known as the Wars of the Roses provides a powerful example of these networks in action. As the crown passed violently between the houses of Lancaster and York, the entire English countryside became a dangerous chessboard of shifting allegiances. A messenger carrying the White Rose of York would be a dead man in a Lancastrian-held town, and vice versa. To navigate this treacherous landscape, both sides developed elaborate networks of safe houses. A Yorkist courier traveling through Lancashire, a Lancastrian stronghold, would not rely on a map but on a sequence of coded signs, a certain colored cloth tied to a fence post, a specific carving on a village sign, a verse of a song hummed in a tavern. Each sign would lead them to the next safe haven, perhaps the home of a wool merchant who owed his fortune to a Yorkist lord, or a nunnery where the abbess's brother fought for the Yorkist cause. The entire operation depended on the silence and bravery of these sympathizers. Harboring a messenger was an act of high treason, punishable by forfeiture of lands and public execution. They risked everything: their wealth, their freedom, their family's future, for a few moments of shelter and a whispered update on the war. The role of these quiet heroes cannot be overstated. They were the stationary anchors in the messenger's tumultuous journey, while the courier was the flash of lightning that carried the energy of the message. These men and women were the grounding rods, providing the stability that made the entire system possible. Their courage was of a different, perhaps even more profound kind. The messenger's risk was acute, a sudden, violent confrontation on the road. The safe house keeper's risk was chronic, a constant, low hum of anxiety that lasted for years, the fear that a single suspicious neighbor, a single careless word from a child, or a single midnight knock on the door could bring their world crashing down. They had to be masters of deception in their own right, maintaining a perfect facade of neutrality in their daily lives, while secretly sheltering the very individuals who could destroy them. This strategy fundamentally redefines the romantic notion of the lone, heroic messenger. It reveals that their success was almost never a solitary achievement. It was a collective effort, a chain of trust that stretched across counties and kingdoms. Each safe house was a link in that chain, and the strength of the entire network depended on the integrity of every single one. A message's journey was a relay race not just of horses and riders, but of human solidarity. It passed from the hands of a galloping courier into the caring hands of a hidden community, who offered rest and safety before sending that rider back out into the darkness, strengthened and renewed. These hidden sanctuaries were more than just buildings. They were living proof that even in the darkest times of war and suspicion, empathy and courage could create pockets of safety, ensuring that the vital lines of communication and the hope they carried were never completely broken. But within this shadowy world of clandestine couriers and secret networks, some of the most effective operatives have been almost entirely written out of the history books. We must now turn our attention to a group whose contributions were long overlooked precisely because their methods were so brilliantly discreet: the women messengers of the Middle Ages. Operating under a veil of societal expectation and perceived innocence, these women leveraged the rigid gender norms of their time as the perfect camouflage, moving through a landscape of suspicion with a freedom that often eluded their male counterparts. Their stories reveal a fascinating paradox where the very constraints placed upon them by a patriarchal society became the keys to their extraordinary success. For a noblewoman, her high social station provided a unique form of diplomatic immunity. Traveling with a retinue of servants between castles or to religious sites was a common and unquestioned part of her life. Who would dare to thoroughly search the carriage of a duchess or a countess? Such an act would be a profound breach of etiquette and could spark an international incident. This privilege made noblewomen ideal carriers for the most sensitive of documents: peace treaties, marriage contracts, or letters of alliance between powerful families. A sealed message could be hidden in a seemingly innocent embroidery frame, tucked among her personal linens, or even memorized and delivered orally in the genteel setting of a private audience. Her entire journey was a performance of aristocratic normalcy, a shield behind which affairs of state could be conducted with impunity. We have records, for instance, of noblewomen like Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII of England, who was deeply enmeshed in the political intrigues of the Wars of the Roses and almost certainly used her extensive travels to facilitate communication between her son's supporters. In stark contrast, women from the peasant and merchant classes possessed a different kind of invisibility, that of being utterly commonplace, A woman heading to market with a basket of eggs on her arm or a bundle of cloth was a daily sight beneath the notice of guards at a city gate. This mundane cover was perfect for smuggling intelligence. A message could be rolled inside a spindle of wool, baked into a loaf of bread, or even written on a thin strip of fabric and woven into her braided hair. There are accounts from the 100 Years' War of French peasant women who were allowed to pass through English siege lines to sell produce, using this access to carry precise information about enemy troop numbers and positions to the besieged forces inside the city. Their perceived harmlessness was their greatest asset. They were part of the background noise of daily life, a fact they used to brilliant and daring effect. However, this strategy came with its own set of terrifying, gender-specific risks. While a male messenger caught with a dispatch might be imprisoned or executed after interrogation, a woman faced those same fates compounded by the ever-present threat of sexual violence. Her perceived vulnerability could quickly transform from an asset into a liability if her disguise was pierced. Furthermore, the societal consequences of being discovered in such a role could be devastating. A woman acting outside the strict boundaries of her prescribed role risked not only her life but her entire reputation and standing. Accusations of witchcraft or immorality often being used to discredit and punish those who stepped out of line. The courage it took for these women to operate was therefore multifaceted. It was not only the courage to face capture and death, but also the courage to defy the entire social order of their world, to willingly place themselves in a position where, if discovered, they would be condemned not just as enemies but as unnatural women. A powerful example that encapsulates both their method and their mettle comes from the bitter conflicts in medieval Italy. A young woman named Jovana, from a family of Sienese merchants, was recruited to carry a warning of an impending attack from the rival city-state of Florence. The normal routes were watched, and any man of military age would have been immediately detained. Jovana's solution was to join a group of women on a pilgrimage to a nearby shrine, a common and pious journey. She concealed the tiny, vital slip of parchment inside a wax votive candle. As the group approached the Sienese outpost, they were stopped by a Florentine patrol. The soldiers, bored and dismissive, roughly searched the few men traveling with the group, but only gave the women a cursory glance, making a few crude jokes before waving them on. Jovana's heart must have been pounding, but she maintained the calm demeanor expected of a pious pilgrim. She delivered the candle, and the message was retrieved. The warning allowed Sienese forces to prepare an ambush, turning a potential defeat into a significant victory. Jovana wasn't a knight or a noble. She was an ordinary woman who used the enemy's own prejudices as her primary weapon. Historians are now actively working to uncover these lost stories, piecing together evidence from court records, personal letters, and city chronicles that hint at these shadow operations. As scholar Dr. Elena Jenga notes, we have to read between the lines of the chronicles. When a source mentions that a countess greatly facilitated the negotiations or that a siege was lifted after news was brought by a market woman, we are often seeing the faint echoes of a sophisticated female-led intelligence operation. Their success depended on being forgotten by the official record. This research is crucial because it fundamentally broadens our understanding of medieval power dynamics. It shows us that the gears of history were turned not only by the kings and generals who commanded in the open, but also by the countless unseen individuals, including women of all classes, who moved silently through the background, carrying the words that shaped the future. Their legacy is a masterclass in turning perceived weakness into unparalleled strength, a testament to the fact that the most powerful weapon a messenger could possess was sometimes not a sword, but simply the ability to be underestimated. If the open road was a gauntlet of unpredictable dangers, then a city under siege was a pressure cooker of concentrated, inescapable peril. Here, the medieval messenger faced their ultimate test, operating in a world where every inch of ground was contested, every shadow could hide an archer, and the very air was thick with the promise of violence. A siege was a state of suspended animation for those trapped inside, a slow, grinding struggle against starvation and despair. For the messenger, it became a deadly game of ingress and egress, a mission to breach what was designed to be unbreachable, carrying with them the last, desperate hopes of an entire population. The techniques they employed were acts of breathtaking audacity, feats that blurred the line between courier and commando. One of the most common, yet still incredibly dangerous, methods was the use of hidden tunnels or posterns, small, secret gates built into the fortress walls, often concealed by vegetation or known only to a trusted few. A messenger would slip out under the cover of a moonless night, moving like a ghost through the no-man's land between the walls and the enemy encampments. This required an intimate knowledge of the terrain and inhuman levels of patience and silence. A single misstep, the clink of a loose stone, or a cough could alert the besiegers, resulting in a hail of arrows or a swift, silent capture. Other messengers resorted to sheer physical prowess. There are numerous accounts from chronicles of couriers swimming the frigid, refuse-filled waters of castle moats, their precious messages sealed in waxed leather pouches held in their teeth. Some even attempted the near-suicidal task of scaling the outer walls on ropes under the cover of darkness, a desperate climb with nothing but a prayer that the enemy sentries were looking the other way. Perhaps the most psychologically complex method was negotiating a temporary truce. A messenger, often a herald carrying a flag of parley, would approach the enemy lines to formally request safe passage. This was a gambit rooted in the chivalric code, but it was fraught with risk. The enemy commander was under no obligation to agree and could just as easily take the messenger prisoner to extract information. Even if granted, the safe passage was only for a specified time and route, and the messenger would be under the intense, hostile scrutiny of every soldier they passed. It was a move that required immense diplomatic skill and personal courage, walking directly into the lion's den armed with nothing but protocol and a steadfast nerve. The emotional weight carried by these siege messengers was almost unbearable. For those leaving the city, they carried outward the tangible evidence of suffering, a mayor's plea for help, meticulously detailing the dwindling food supplies, the spread of disease, and the heartrending decision of whether to slaughter the last of the prized war horses for meat. They had to look their commander or king in the eye and make them feel the urgency to convey not just facts but the palpable sense of doom settling over the walls. For a messenger fighting their way into a besieged city, the burden was different but equally heavy. They carried the response, a promise of relief that might be weeks away, or worse, the devastating news that no help was coming. To deliver that message, to watch the hope drain from the faces of the defenders, knowing you were the bearer of their final sentence, required a fortitude beyond most human comprehension. One of the most dramatic examples comes from the siege of Château-Gaillard in 1204, a key stronghold in the conflict between the French and English. The fortress, though considered nearly impregnable, was finally breached after a long and brutal siege. As the French forces stormed the inner ward, a small group of English defenders and townsfolk were trapped in the cellar. Their situation was hopeless, yet one among them, a young squire, volunteered to attempt an escape to carry word of their plight. His only way out was through the latrine chute, a narrow, foul conduit that emptied out over the cliff face and into the river Seine far below. He stripped off his armor, covered himself in grease, and squeezed himself into the filth-coated passage, plummeting down and into the icy water below. Somehow, he survived the fall and the current, swimming to the far bank and eventually making his way to English lines. While his heroic effort did not save those left behind, his story became a legendary testament to the extremes a messenger was willing to endure to complete their duty, a symbol of the raw, desperate courage that defined their role in the very crucible of war. But beyond the physical dangers of ambush and the mental strain of deception, the medieval messenger carried a burden far more subtle and potentially corrosive: the power to change the words they carried. Sealed with wax and entrusted as sacred, the message was meant to be an immutable extension of the sender's will. Yet, the courier was the one who held that will in their hands for days or weeks, completely alone with its contents and its potential consequences. This unique position placed them squarely in a profound ethical crucible, forced to weigh their sworn duty against their own conscience, their desire for personal gain against the potential for catastrophic harm. The choice to alter a message to become not just a carrier but an editor of fate was a temptation that asked the deepest questions about loyalty, compassion, and the very nature of truth in a world at war. The motivations to break the seal and rewrite history were as varied as the messengers themselves. For some, it was a simple, venal calculation. A messenger carrying a promise of a large payment or a grant of land to a third party might be tempted to insert their own name, diverting the reward to themselves in a breathtaking act of fraud. The risk was astronomical. Forgery of a royal document was a capital offense, but the potential payoff could lift a commoner into the nobility. For others, the motive was far more complex and morally ambiguous. A compassionate courier, upon reading a dispatch that ordered the execution of a popular local lord or the harsh punishment of a rebellious town, might soften the language or change the command entirely, believing they were preventing a needless tragedy and sparing their conscience from being an accessory to murder. They acted not for greed, but from a personal sense of mercy, placing their own judgment above that of the distant ruler who had issued the command. History provides stark examples of both outcomes, where a single changed word altered the destinies of thousands. In one chilling account from the Crusades, a messenger carrying a vital order to a besieging army was intercepted and bribed by the enemy. The original message read, "Attack at dawn," but the traitorous courier altered it to "Retreat at dawn." The change of one word led to a disastrous and confused withdrawal, resulting in the annihilation of the stranded force and a major strategic defeat. The consequences for the messenger when his betrayal was later uncovered were predictably brutal. In a more sympathetic case, a chronicle from the wars in Italy tells of a young scribe carrying a death warrant for a captured knight known for his chivalry and generosity. The scribe, who had heard songs of the knight's virtues, could not bear to deliver the order. Instead, he altered the warrant to read, "Imprison," rather than "Execute." The knight's life was spared, and years later, when a shift in power occurred, he was released. The scribe's secret act of compassion was never discovered, and the knight went on to broker a peace that saved countless lives. In one scenario, alteration was an act of treachery with bloody results. In the other, it was a secret act of humanity that ultimately fostered peace. This dilemma did not go unnoticed by the great thinkers of the age. Medieval philosophers wrestling with concepts of duty, natural law, and conscience would have viewed the messenger's predicament through a rigorous lens. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas, who wrote extensively on just war theory and the obedience owed to superiors, would likely have argued for absolute fidelity to the command. In his view, the messenger was merely an instrument, a vessel for the will of a legitimate authority. To alter the message was not just disobedience, it was a violation of the natural order, a prideful assumption of an authority one did not possess, which could lead to greater disorder and harm. The safety of the state depended on the reliability of its communication, and any breach of that trust, even for compassionate reasons, undermined the very foundation of governance. Yet other strands of medieval thought offered a more nuanced perspective. The tradition of Christian ethics, with its emphasis on mercy and the primacy of conscience, could provide a framework for justification. If a messenger truly believed, in their heart of hearts, that carrying out the order would be a mortal sin, a direct violation of God's law against murder, for instance, then some theologians might argue that a higher duty to divine law superseded their duty to an earthly master. This was not a decision to be made lightly. It was a terrifying burden of conscience, where the messenger had to weigh the certainty of their own damnation against the potential earthly punishment for treason. They were caught in an impossible bind between two powerful ethical systems, one demanding unwavering obedience to maintain social order, and the other demanding unwavering adherence to a personal moral compass. This leaves us with a haunting, reflective question that echoes far beyond the medieval world. When is disobedience the highest form of duty? Can breaking a rule ever be the right thing to do? The messenger, alone on that dark road, became a solitary judge and jury, forced to make a snap decision with ramifications they could scarcely foresee. There is no easy answer then or now. To always obey is to risk becoming a tool of tyranny. To disobey is to risk unleashing chaos. The ethical landscape they navigated was not a clear path but a treacherous bog, where every step was a choice between competing virtues. Their silent struggles remind us that courage is not just physical bravery in the face of an enemy, but the moral courage to confront the ambiguity of right and wrong, armed with nothing but one's own conscience and the terrifying power to change the story. Behind every successful mission that defied bandits and crossed mountains lay a foundation built not in a single moment of bravery, but over years of grueling, meticulous preparation. The medieval messenger was not born. They were forged through a rigorous system of training that honed their body, sharpened their mind, and tested their spirit to the absolute limit. This was an apprenticeship in the truest sense, a journey from raw recruit to trusted agent where the stakes of failure were not a poor grade, but a lost message and a lost life. Their legendary courage was not a mystical quality, but the final, polished product of relentless discipline and the careful passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. A young boy, often from a family already connected to a royal court or a noble household, would begin his training in his early teens. His first lessons were not in secrecy or codes, but in the most fundamental tool of his trade, the horse. Horsemanship was his primary discipline. He would spend countless hours in the stables, not just riding, but learning every aspect of the animal's care, how to groom, feed, and treat injuries, knowing that the health of his mount was directly tied to his own survival. He was taught to ride not just for speed, but for endurance, learning to conserve the animal's energy over long distances. He practiced mounting and dismounting at a full gallop, a vital skill for swiftly switching horses at a relay station or escaping an ambush. This deep, symbiotic relationship with his horse was the bedrock of his entire profession. The animal was partner, transportation, and often his only companion on the long, lonely road. Alongside this physical training ran a relentless curriculum in mental agility. Since written messages could be intercepted or damaged, many of the most sensitive communications were delivered orally. A messenger had to be a living, breathing ledger, capable of memorizing long, complex strings of information, battle plans, lists of names, detailed treaty terms with perfect accuracy. Trainers employed sophisticated memory techniques, often called the Art of Memory, which involved associating information with specific visual images or locations in a familiar mental palace. A trainee might be told to memorize a seemingly nonsensical story, only to later decipher that the hero's journey past a golden rock, a crooked tree, and a blue door actually encoded the route of a supply convoy. They were tested constantly, given longer and more complex messages to retain under increasing distraction, simulating the stress and exhaustion of a real journey. The goal was to make their memory a fortress, impervious to fatigue or fear, but knowledge and skill were useless without unwavering loyalty. This was the most difficult quality to teach and the most essential to test. A messenger held the crown's most precious secrets in their hands, and the temptation to sell that information to the highest bidder was a constant threat. Prospective couriers were subjected to elaborate loyalty tests long before they were entrusted with a real mission. A senior messenger might pose as a foreign agent, offering the young apprentice a pouch of silver for a glimpse of a practice scroll. Those who hesitated or reported the offer were promoted. Those who showed even a flicker of interest were immediately dismissed from service. Some lords were known to stage fake ambushes to see how a trainee would react under pressure. Would he fight? Would he try to destroy the message? Or would he crumble and surrender? These tests were brutal, but they were necessary. Trust was the currency of the entire communication network, and it was not given freely. It had to be earned through proven character. The final stage of their education was practical, hands-on experience under the wing of a seasoned mentor. A young apprentice would accompany an established courier on shorter, less dangerous local deliveries, acting as a helper and an observer. He would watch how his mentor interacted with innkeepers, how he subtly assessed strangers in a tavern, and how he navigated a tricky ford across a river. He learned the unspoken rules of the road, which monasteries offered the most discreet hospitality, how to barter for a fresh horse without drawing attention, and the telltale signs of a road that was being watched. This mentorship was invaluable. It was the difference between theoretical knowledge and the hard-won wisdom of experience. The veteran would share stories of his own near misses and mistakes, lessons that were never written in any manual but were etched in memory through trial and error. One compelling story from the German states tells of a young apprentice named Klaus on his first major journey with his mentor, an old courier named Gottfried. Their route took them through a stretch of forest known for bandits. Gottfried, sensing something amiss from the unusual silence of the birds, insisted they dismount and lead their horses off the path to hide. The impatient Klaus, eager to prove himself, thought the old man was being overly cautious and muttered his disapproval. Rather than scold him, Gottfried simply handed the boy the message pouch and said, "You lead then." Within an hour, Klaus walked them straight into the sightline of a bandit scout. It was only Gottfried's sharp eyes and quick action, a well-thrown knife that took down the scout before he could sound a horn, that saved them. That night, instead of punishing him, Gottfried made the shaken Klaus clean and returned the knife. It was a lesson more powerful than any lecture. Overconfidence was a quicker killer than any bandit, and true courage was tempered with humility and respect for the dangers of the world. This blend of harsh practical lessons and guiding mentorship did not just create messengers. It forged individuals of immense resilience, discretion, and steadfastness, ready to carry the weight of empires on their young shoulders. Yet for all their training and all their strategies, the true, world-altering power of the medieval messenger is measured not in the miles they traveled, but in the moments they made possible. Across the centuries, specific deliveries stand out like beacons, instances where the courage of a single individual, the stamina of a horse, and the integrity of a sealed packet of information literally redirected the flow of history itself. These are the stories where the abstract concept of duty crystallizes into something tangible and profound, where we can point to a specific date and say, because this person succeeded, the world we know today is different. Consider the year 1381 in England. The country was simmering with resentment following the Black Death, which had killed a huge portion of the population and yet led to laws freezing the wages of the surviving peasant laborers. A radical preacher named John Ball was traveling the countryside, his sermons on equality and justice acting as a spark on dry tinder. But how to coordinate a widespread uprising? The message that would become the catalyst was a simple, rhyming couplet spread by runners and riders who moved with clandestine speed from village to village, when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman. This was a direct challenge to the very foundation of the feudal social order, a powerful idea that could only spread as fast as a person could carry it. The successful, rapid dissemination of this message and the call to gather at Blackheath was the essential trigger for the peasants' revolt. Tens of thousands of men from across the southeast converged on London, led by Wat Tyler, and while the revolt was ultimately crushed with brutal force, its impact was permanent. It shook the English aristocracy to its core, demonstrated the formidable power of a united common folk, and is widely seen by historians as the beginning of the end for serfdom in England. The messengers who carried those words did not just deliver a summons, they delivered the first blow in a class war that would echo for centuries. In a completely different context, the fate of entire kingdoms could hinge on a single, timely warning. History is filled with near misses, with assassination plots that were foiled only because a loyal subject learned of the scheme and a swift rider managed to outpace the conspirators. One such story involves King James I of Scotland in the early 15th century. A group of nobles, displeased with his rule, planned to ambush him during a Christmas celebration at Perth. The plot was overheard by a young page loyal to the king, but the court was miles away. With no time to spare, the boy stole a horse and rode through the freezing night, pushing the animal to its limits. He arrived at the festivities breathless and disheveled, managing to whisper the warning to the king just moments before the assassins stormed the hall. Armed with this crucial intelligence, the king's guards were prepared, and the attack was thwarted. The messenger's desperate ride had preserved the monarchy, preventing a bloody civil war that would have certainly engulfed Scotland. His actions ensured a continuity of rule that would shape Scottish politics for a generation, a monumental outcome from one young man's bravery and a single life-or-death gallop through the darkness. Perhaps the most epic scale of messenger impact lies in the realm of military coordination, where the successful delivery of a battle plan could mean the difference between a nation's independence and its subjugation. The story of King Robert the Bruce of Scotland at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 is a perfect example. Bruce's strategy to defeat the much larger, better-equipped English army of Edward II relied on luring the enemy onto a specific boggy field where their heavy cavalry would become trapped. But for the plan to work, a hidden force of Scottish spearmen had to emerge from nearby woods at the precise moment to flank the English. The coordination of this complex maneuver across a chaotic battlefield, without flags or trumpets that could be heard over the din, depended entirely on a pre-arranged signal. A messenger was dispatched to carry the king's order to the hidden camp. Dodging English patrols and navigating the treacherous terrain under cover of darkness, the courier delivered the command. The next day, at the crucial moment the signal was given, the Highlanders surged forward, and the English lines collapsed in confusion and panic. The victory at Bannockburn secured Scottish sovereignty for centuries. The entire battle, one of the most significant in British history, turned on the successful completion of one messenger's mission the night before. The ripple effects of these successful deliveries are almost impossible to overstate. A failed message before the peasants' revolt might have left social tensions to simmer longer, potentially altering the entire trajectory of English labor laws. A delayed warning to King James could have plunged Scotland into a bloody succession crisis. A captured courier before Bannockburn would have meant a different signal, or no signal at all, likely resulting in a crushing Scottish defeat and the absorption of the kingdom into England. We so often view history as the story of great men and women making grand decisions in palaces and war rooms, but those decisions were powerless without the legs, the wits, and the unwavering courage of the individuals who carried them out into the world. They were the vital link between intention and action, the human spark that ignited historical change. Their contributions make the narrative of the past far richer and more human, reminding us that history is not just shaped by the voices that give orders, but by the often nameless figures who, through sheer determination, ensure those orders are heard. Yet for all the trust placed in the integrity of a message, there existed a far more sinister dimension to their world, a shadow game where the very information they carried could be turned into a poison. Beyond the physical threat of ambush lay the peril of psychological warfare, a battle fought not with swords but with carefully crafted lies designed to unravel an enemy from the inside out. The intercepted message was not always a prize to be decoded for its secrets. Sometimes it was merely the raw material, the blank canvas upon which a cunning adversary could paint a masterpiece of deception. In this dark art, the messenger's sacred duty was perverted, their role transformed from lifeline into unwitting instrument of demoralization and chaos. The methods were as clever as they were cruel. An enemy agent capturing a courier wouldn't just take his message, they would study it, replicate the seal, mimic the handwriting, and then craft a brilliant forgery. The original, truthful contents would be discarded, replaced with a devastating falsehood tailored to sow maximum confusion and despair. One of the most common and effective tactics was the falsified surrender order. Imagine the scene. A castle has held out against a siege for months, its defenders tired but resolute, their morale sustained by the belief that relief is on its way. Then, a messenger, perhaps one of their own, captured days earlier and now coerced or replaced staggers to the gates, looking every bit the part of a heroic survivor. He delivers a message bearing the unmistakable seal of their commanding general, but upon reading it, the castle's lord finds not words of encouragement, but a direct command to lay down arms and surrender immediately, citing the utter failure of the relief force and the hopelessness of their situation. The effect was psychological devastation. The forged order didn't just suggest defeat, it came with the full, crushing authority of their own chain of command, tearing the very foundation of their resolve out from under them. In an age where communication was slow and verification impossible, such a trick could convince an entire garrison to throw open their gates to the enemy, all because they believed the order came from their own side. But the manipulation didn't stop at fake orders. The same technique could be used to spread distrust and paranoia among an enemy's ranks. A forged letter could be created, purportedly from a high-ranking noble to a rival, discussing the details of a secret betrayal. This message would then be accidentally allowed to fall into the wrong hands. As it circulated among the officers, it would create a toxic atmosphere of suspicion, turning allies against each other. Commanders who had fought side by side for years would suddenly view each other with cold, calculating eyes, wondering if every strategic suggestion was part of a deeper treachery. This kind of manufactured discord could cripple an army's effectiveness far more surely than any cavalry charge, paralyzing its leadership with doubt and second-guessing. The chronicler Philippe de Comines, writing about the wars of the late 15th century, observed that a clever lie well placed is worth 1,000 lances, acknowledging that the most damaging blows were often struck against the mind, not the body. Faced with this pervasive threat, messengers and their masters had to develop counter-strithms to verify authenticity, turning every delivery into a potential test. This gave rise to a whole new layer of secret protocols. Messages often included hidden authenticators known only to the sender and receiver, a seemingly random word in the third sentence, a specific way of folding the parchment, or a tiny, almost invisible pinprick in a certain letter of the seal. The historian Dr. Cassandra Clark, an expert on medieval communication, notes that we see evidence of increasingly sophisticated personal ciphers and verification rituals from the 14th century onward. It was an arms race. The better the forgers became, the more creative the authentication methods had to be. A receiving commander was trained to scrutinize every aspect of the message and the messenger. Was the courier's behavior off? Did he know the pre-arranged password or response to a challenge? Did the paper feel right? Was the wax the correct shade of red? The pressure on the messenger to remember these complex verbal codes and behaviors was immense, adding yet another layer of psychological stress to their already perilous job. They were now the guardians of a secret handshake that could determine the fate of thousands. This dark practice reveals the ultimate evolution of information in the medieval world. It was no longer just a tool, it had become a versatile and brutal weapon. The same parchment that could carry a king's love poem could also carry the seeds of an army's destruction. This reality forced everyone in the chain of command to confront a deeply unsettling truth, that nothing could be taken at face value. Trust, the very commodity the messenger was sworn to uphold, became the primary target of their enemies. The battlefield thus expanded from the muddy fields and castle walls into the very minds of the soldiers and commanders, where a single, well-crafted lie could be more destructive than any siege engine. In this shadow war, the courage of the messenger was matched only by the cunning of the forger, and the victory often went not to the strongest army, but to the one that could most effectively weaponize doubt. But beyond the grand strategies of codes and disguises lay a more intimate, tactile form of genius, the endless, silent innovation of where to hide the message itself. This was a world of minute craftsmanship and breathtaking creativity, where the most powerful secrets in Christendom were folded into the lining of a cloak, baked into a loaf of bread, or even carried inside the human body. The medieval messenger's toolkit for concealment was a testament to their understanding that the best way to protect a secret was to make it disappear into the utterly mundane, to transform the message from a prized object into an invisible part of the everyday world. Some methods required the skilled hands of an artisan long before the messenger ever set foot on the road. One of the most common and effective was the art of sewing messages into clothing. A tailor loyal to the cause could unpick the seam of a tunic or a cloak and carefully stitch the thin, rolled parchment into the hem or between two layers of fabric. The seam would be resewn with such precision that even a close inspection would reveal nothing amiss. For even greater security, some messages were written on silk, which could be folded into a tiny, noiseless square that would not crackle or betray its presence like parchment might. Other craftsmen specialized in creating hollow objects. A wooden staff, the constant companion of any pilgrim or traveler, could be expertly drilled out to create a narrow cavity just wide enough for a rolled scroll, sealed at the end with a plug of wax and dirt to make it look worn and solid. Coins were another favorite. A skilled silversmith could craft a coin with two thin faces soldered together, creating a hollow center for a tiny, tightly folded slip of paper. A messenger could carry a purse full of these special coins, and even if he were robbed, the thieves would likely spend the valuable currency without a second thought, never realizing they were dispersing state secrets across the countryside. Then there were the methods that bordered on alchemy, requiring specific knowledge to unlock. The double-layered parchment was a masterpiece of deception. A scribe would write an innocent, boring letter, a recipe for stew, a list of farm supplies on a sheet of high-quality parchment. Then, using a much thinner, almost transparent piece of parchment made from the skin of a stillborn calf, known as vellum, he would write the true, secret message. This second layer was then carefully glued over the first, its edges perfectly blended and smoothed. To any observer, even someone holding it up to the light, it appeared to be a single, utterly mundane document. Only the intended recipient knew the secret. To gently heat the parchment over a candle flame, the glue would soften, allowing the top layer to be peeled away and the true message beneath to be revealed. Similarly, messages were written in invisible inks made from lemon juice, vinegar, or even urine. These liquids would dry clear on the parchment, leaving it seemingly blank. The message would only appear when the paper was warmed, the organic compounds in the ink caramelizing to form brown, readable text. This meant a messenger could be caught with a seemingly blank scroll and still be carrying the most sensitive of intelligence. The pressure of the moment also spurred incredible on-the-fly ingenuity. There are accounts of messengers hearing the approach of hostile riders, desperately chewing and swallowing a wax-sealed message to prevent its discovery. Others, with more time, would use their environment creatively. One story tells of a messenger pursued through a market who quickly bought a small wheel of cheese, hollowed out a portion of the soft center, inserted his message, and then smoothed the surface over, continuing his journey as a simple man carrying his lunch. Another, cornered in a church, slipped his rolled dispatch into the hollowed-out handle of a votive candle, lighting it amongst dozens of others before being searched and released. He returned later to retrieve it. These were acts of desperate brilliance, proving that their cleverness was not just taught, but a fundamental survival instinct honed by constant peril. This hidden world of concealment was, of course, an arms race. As messengers became more inventive, those hunting them became more thorough. Guards at city gates learned to feel the hems of cloaks for unusual thickness, to tap wooden staffs to hear if they sounded hollow, and to scrutinize seals for any sign of tampering. This ever-increasing scrutiny forced a constant evolution in methods. What worked one year might be common knowledge the next, pushing messengers and their masters to dream up ever more elaborate hiding places. This relentless innovation showcases a different kind of medieval mind, not just the warrior or the scholar, but the pragmatic puzzle solver. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that some of history's most important battles were won not on the battlefield, but in the quiet workshop of a craftsman or in the panicked, brilliant moment when a lone individual had to make a secret disappear. Beyond the mental maps and coded messages, the medieval messenger's survival often hinged on the very tangible, carefully chosen items they carried on their person. This was a world where the right piece of gear could mean the difference between life and death, and every ounce in their pack was a calculated decision between preparedness and the crippling burden of excess weight. Their toolkit was a mirror of their existence, practical, multifunctional, and born from the harsh lessons of the road. The most vital and versatile item was undoubtedly their cloak. This was far more than a simple garment. It was a mobile shelter system, crafted from thick, oiled wool or heavy frieze cloth. A good cloak was virtually waterproof, shielding its wearer from driving rain and biting wind. At night, it became a blanket, providing crucial warmth when sleeping rough under a hedgerow or in a drafty barn. Its large, draping form could also serve as a perfect screen for changing clothes or examining a map in secret. and when pulled up to obscure the face, it was the first and easiest element of a disguise. One chronicle from the Welsh marches tells of a messenger who, caught in a sudden blizzard, used his heavy cloak not just to keep warm, but to create a small, life-saving tent for himself and his horse by propping it up with his staff over a rocky outcrop. He survived a night that would have certainly killed a less prepared traveler, all thanks to that one essential piece of cloth. For self-defense, the weapon of choice was rarely a heavy broadsword. Those were for knights on a battlefield. A messenger needed something compact, fast, and always accessible. This was the domain of the dagger. A long, sharp blade could be easily concealed in a boot or beneath a tunic, drawn in an instant to parry a bandit's knife or to cut a horse's tether in a frantic escape. Its uses extended far beyond combat. It was a vital survival tool for preparing food, cutting kindling for a fire, or repairing a broken strap on a saddle. There's an account from a French monastic source of a messenger whose horse became entangled in a thorny thicket after bolting in fright. Unable to free the terrified animal with his bare hands, he used his dagger to methodically cut away the vines, saving his mount and, by extension, his mission. The dagger was an extension of their will to survive, a multi-purpose instrument for overcoming 100 different obstacles. Hydration was a constant, grinding concern. A leather water skin, treated to make it relatively watertight, was a non-negotiable part of their kit. Finding fresh, safe water was not always possible, and a messenger could not afford the debilitating weakness of dehydration or the crippling effects of waterborne illness. They learned to refill at every clear stream they passed, knowing the next stretch of road might be dry for miles. Some seasoned veterans carried a small piece of vinegar-soaked sponge or a few drops of strong spirits like aqua vitae to purify questionable water in a pinch. The weight of a full skin was a trade-off they gladly made, a heavy reminder of a fundamental need that could not be ignored. For navigation, the most advanced messengers might carry a small, portable compass, a rare and expensive luxury item in the medieval period. This was not the precise instrument of a sea captain, but a simple iron needle magnetized by rubbing it with a lodestone and then floated on a piece of straw in a bowl of water. In the featureless fog of a moor or under a starless sky, this crude device could at least confirm a general direction, preventing a traveler from wandering in hopeless circles. The more scholarly or well-funded courier might even possess a simple astrolabe, a complex disc of brass used to calculate latitude by measuring the angle of the sun or stars. This was the height of medieval technology, allowing a messenger to know roughly how far north or south they were, a priceless advantage when navigating by a coastline or a mountain range. These tools represent the intellectual edge of the profession, a move beyond simple wayfinding towards a more scientific understanding of their place in the world. But every item had its cost. The relentless calculus of weight versus utility governed every choice. An extra wool blanket might mean warmth but could slow a horse just enough to be caught by pursuers. A book of maps, while invaluable, was heavy and fragile. Messengers became masters of minimalism, often choosing gear that served multiple purposes. A sturdy eating knife could also be a weapon. A large metal badge from a recent pilgrimage could be used as a makeshift signal mirror to flash warnings across a valley. Their entire existence was a lesson in practical efficiency, each object in their possession earning its place through proven, life-saving utility. This carefully curated collection of gear transforms them from abstract figures of history into relatable, practical individuals. We can almost feel the weight of the water skin, the rough texture of the wool cloak, the cool grip of the dagger's hilt. Their toolkit was a physical manifestation of their resilience, a portable embodiment of the wisdom that to be prepared was not just a strategy, but the very essence of survival on the long and dangerous road. But the true legacy of these courageous individuals is not found only in dusty chronicles or official records. It is woven into the very fabric of medieval culture, captured in the vibrant threads of tapestries, the brilliant pigments of illuminated manuscripts, and the enduring tales of folklore. These artistic depictions offer us a priceless window into how society viewed its messengers, transforming them from historical figures into powerful cultural symbols that reveal the deepest values and anxieties of the age. In art, the messenger is rarely just a man on a horse. They are an idea, a representation of speed, loyalty, and the fragile connection between distant powers. One of the most famous and detailed portrayals comes from the Bayeux Tapestry, that epic 70-meter-long embroidered chronicle of the Norman conquest of England. Within its bustling scenes, messengers are not peripheral figures but essential narrative devices, their movements driving the story forward. We see them depicted with a specific purpose. Their bodies are often leaning forward, caught in mid-stride or mid-gallop, a visual shorthand for urgency and motion. In one crucial panel, a messenger arrives at the court of Duke William, his posture dynamic and his hand raised in speech. His arrival is the catalyst, the moment news of Harold's betrayal is delivered, setting the entire invasion in motion. The tapestry's artisans didn't need to label him. His role was communicated through his action. He is the human spark of the conflict, and his depiction underscores a fundamental medieval truth: that information was the primary engine of historical change. His importance is signaled not by his size or finery, but by his central placement in the sequence of events, a testament to how deeply the medieval mind understood the link between communication and power. Beyond grand tapestries, the humble yet magnificent world of illuminated manuscripts provides another rich source of imagery. In the margins of prayer books and chronicles, scribes often drew scenes from daily life, and the messenger was a familiar character. They are frequently shown riding horses of exceptional beauty and speed, often depicted with all four hooves off the ground in a flying gallop, an artistic convention used to denote supernatural speed or divine purpose. This association with swift animals extended to symbolism. The messenger was often conceptually linked to the hare for its speed, the fox for its cunning, or even the dove for its role as a peaceful harbinger. In some heraldic traditions, families known for their service as royal couriers incorporated these animals into their coats of arms, a permanent badge of honor that proclaimed their lineage's defining trait, not just loyalty, but incredible velocity. The cultural significance of the messenger also found a vibrant voice in the literature of the time, most notably in the works of Geoffrey Chaucer. In the Canterbury Tales, the entire framing device is a pilgrimage, that great moving tapestry of medieval society where secrets and stories were exchanged as freely as goods. While not a messenger in the official sense, the character of the canon's yeoman arrives riding so fast that his horse is described as sweating, foaming white lather, a classic visual cue instantly recognizable to a medieval audience that a character was bearing urgent, perhaps disruptive, news. Chaucer uses this archetype to brilliant effect. The yeoman's frantic entrance breaks the established rhythm of the pilgrimage, his speed and disheveled state signaling the arrival of a truth that cannot be contained. It shows how the figure of the breathless, urgent courier was a powerful literary trope, a device that could instantly inject drama and advance the plot, because every listener knew that a person moving at such a pace carried a story that would change everything. These artistic and literary depictions did more than just record a profession. They shaped the very archetype of the messenger for centuries to come, crafting an image that still influences our modern perceptions. They cemented the idea of the messenger as a heroic, determined figure, alone against the elements whose personal sacrifice served a greater good. This romantic vision, however, often glossed over the grittier realities of the job, the fear, the disease, the bureaucratic nature of most deliveries in favor of a more idealized symbol. This legacy is why, even today, our stories are filled with these archetypes: the galloping rider in fantasy epics, the dashing spy who must deliver the microfilm, the whistleblower racing against time to expose the truth. These modern characters are the direct descendants of the figures in the Bayeux Tapestry and Chaucer's tales, inheritors of a cultural tradition that forever links the act of carrying a message with high stakes, heroism, and world-altering consequence. The art of the Middle Ages didn't just depict the messenger, it bestowed upon them a cloak of symbolism, transforming their historical duty into a timeless narrative of urgency, trust, and the incredible power of a single voice connecting one world to another. This profound, almost sacred bond of trust between a ruler and their messenger offers a timeless masterclass in leadership itself. The medieval world understood something that modern executives and managers are still striving to grasp: that true authority is not wielded through control, but through the empowerment of others. A king in his castle and a CEO in their corner office face the same fundamental challenge: they cannot be everywhere at once. Their power and their vision are only as effective as the people they choose to represent them in the field. The messenger was the ultimate example of this delegated authority, a human vessel into which a leader had to pour their absolute trust. This relationship was built on a foundation of meticulous selection, but it was sustained by something far more powerful: a mutual pact of loyalty and accountability that flowed in both directions. The most effective medieval rulers were those who recognized that their couriers were not mere servants, but partners in governance. They invested in their training, equipped them properly, and perhaps most importantly, showed them respect. This fostered a fierce, personal devotion that no amount of gold could buy. We see this reflected in the rare but powerful praises recorded in chronicles and letters. King Louis IX of France, known as Saint Louis, was said to have valued his messengers above many of his knights, noting that "a true and swift courier is the nerve of my will, without which my arm cannot act." This wasn't just a flowery compliment. It was a stark acknowledgement of strategic reality. Another monarch, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire, a man renowned for his intellectual and administrative rigor, demanded incredible discipline from his messengers but rewarded it with lavish grants of land and titles. He famously stated, "To the faithful messenger, I entrust my very voice, and he who carries it well shall find his own voice amplified in my court." These leaders understood that inspiring loyalty was not about extracting it through fear, but about earning it through respect and reciprocal commitment. They held their messengers accountable for results, but they also held themselves accountable for the courier's well-being and success. This historical dynamic holds up a mirror to modern leadership. How many managers today truly empower their teams with the same level of trust that a medieval king placed in a man riding alone into bandit-infested woods? The principles are directly transferable. The first is the principle of clear delegation. A messenger was never given a vague command like, "Go find out what's happening in the north." They were given a specific, measurable objective: ride to the Castle Durham, deliver this sealed letter into the hand of the castellan only, and return with his reply before the new moon. The mission's success was crystal clear to everyone involved. The second is the principle of providing the right tools. A wise ruler didn't just command a messenger to be fast. He provided the fastest horse, the best maps, and a network of safe houses. In a modern context, this translates to equipping employees with the proper technology, training, and budgetary support to actually achieve their goals, rather than just setting targets and expecting miracles. The final and perhaps most crucial principle is the cultivation of resilience. Leaders like Louis IX didn't just value success, they valued the tenacity to overcome failure. A messenger who returned unsuccessful but with a full report on why he failed a washed-out bridge, a new enemy patrol was often valued more highly than one who simply succeeded through luck. This created a culture where problem-solving and honest communication were rewarded, even in the face of setbacks. So what can today's leaders do to inspire this same brand of unwavering dedication? It begins by moving beyond transactional relationships. A paycheck might secure someone's presence, but it will never secure their full commitment. It requires building a culture where trust is the default, not the exception. This means leaders must be vulnerable enough to delegate truly important tasks, not just the trivial ones, and to resist the micromanaging urge to control every step of the process. It means celebrating not only the final delivery of the project, but also praising the ingenuity and perseverance shown along the way, the modern equivalent of a messenger's clever disguise or their determined navigation through a storm. It's about creating an environment where people feel personally invested in the mission because they know their leader is personally invested in them. The medieval messenger was willing to risk his life not for a kingdom's abstract concept, but for a king who knew his name, who valued his skill, and who could be trusted to honor his sacrifice. In our modern quest for loyalty and results, perhaps the most powerful question a leader can ask is not, "What can my team do for me?" but rather, "How can I become the kind of leader for whom my team would ride through the night?" Yet for all their ingenuity and courage, the era of the medieval messenger was not destined to last forever. The very same human drive for connection and speed that had created their vital role would eventually spawn the technologies that made them obsolete. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, inexorable transformation, a revolution in communication that reshaped the world and redefined what it meant to send a message. The decline of these intricate, human-powered networks was brought about by a confluence of innovations, each one chipping away at the need for a lone individual to physically carry a secret across the land. The first major blow came from the rise of more formalized and public postal services. While kings had always maintained their own royal courier networks, these were exclusive, expensive, and designed for state business. The true game-changer was the establishment of postal systems available to merchants and even private citizens. This concept began to take hold in the 15th and 16th centuries across Europe. The most famous early example was the Thurn-und-Taxis family, who, starting in the late 15th century, built a sprawling commercial postal network that eventually serviced much of the Holy Roman Empire. This was not about a single heroic journey, but about reliable, regular, and predictable delivery. A letter from a merchant in Brussels to a partner in Vienna no longer required a dedicated, secretive courier. It could be handed over to a post rider for a set fee, to be carried along a scheduled route with many other pieces of correspondence. The personal risk was dramatically reduced because the message was no longer unique and urgent state secret. It was one item in a bulk shipment. The drama of the solitary mission was replaced by the efficiency of the logistical operation. Almost simultaneously, the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 began to change the very nature of information itself. Before the press, every document was unique, a handwritten original that required physical transport. The press allowed for the mass production of identical texts, news sheets, religious pamphlets, political decrees. This meant that a single message could be sent to a printing house in a major city and then distributed en masse to the surrounding region. the need for a messenger to carry one specific letter to one specific lord was diminished when you could print hundreds of copies of a proclamation and have them read aloud in every town square. Information began to decouple from the individual carrier. It became a commodity that could be replicated and spread through society in a decentralized way, lessening the strategic importance of intercepting any single courier. The final, decisive technological blow arrived in the 19th century with the telegraph. For the first time in human history, a message could travel faster than a human being, in fact, almost instantly. The content was separated from its physical form entirely, converted into electrical impulses that raced along wires strung across continents and under oceans. The telegraph didn't just reduce risk, it eliminated the peril of the journey altogether. The bandits, the storms, the treacherous mountain passes, all were rendered irrelevant by a click of a key in a quiet office. A message that would have taken a medieval messenger weeks of life-threatening effort to deliver could now cross an ocean in minutes. This was the ultimate obsolescence. The courage, the disguises, the knowledge of the stars, all the skills we've spent this video admiring were suddenly artifacts of a bygone age. In the long transition between these eras, there were fascinating hybrid figures who bridged the old world and the new. The royal post riders of the 17th and 18th centuries are a perfect example. They still rode horses along established routes, much like their medieval predecessors. They still faced dangers from highwaymen and the elements, but they were no longer solitary agents of a king's will. They were cogs in a larger bureaucratic machine, employees of a state-run or private postal service. They carried standardized mail bags instead of a single, precious sealed scroll. Theirs was a job, a profession with set wages and schedules, not a sacred duty bound by a personal oath to a monarch. They represent the gradual taming of the message-carrying profession, the move from high-stakes espionage to essential public utility. Reflecting on this evolution, we are left to ponder what was lost and what was gained. What was lost is the stuff of legend, the profound, personal drama of communication, the intimate trust between a ruler and their courier, the breathtaking individuality of a mission where one person's skill and courage could alter the fate of thousands. We lost the rich, human stories of ingenuity and survival, the deep connection to the landscape, and the raw, personal stakes that made information feel so vitally important. What we gained, of course, was nothing short of a new world: speed, reliability, accessibility, and safety. We gained the ability to connect the entire globe, to share information not just with kings but with everyone. The decline of the medieval messenger was the necessary price of progress, the closing of a thrilling, dangerous chapter in human history to make way for the modern era of instant, effortless connection. Their passing reminds us that every leap forward comes with a touch of nostalgia for the vivid, human-scale drama that was left behind. The dangers faced by a medieval courier racing to break a siege may seem a world away from our modern lives, but the spirit of their mission is far from extinct. If we listen closely, we can hear the echo of their galloping hooves in the tireless work of today's unsung heroes who carry vital information through the digital and physical battlefields of our time. Consider the war correspondent, a figure who steps directly into the heart of conflict, not with a weapon, but with a camera and a notebook. Their mission is strikingly similar: to acquire crucial information and carry it back to a world that needs to know. They navigate not forests teeming with bandits, but city streets controlled by hostile factions, where a wrong turn or a misunderstood checkpoint can be just as deadly as any medieval ambush. Their courage is not measured in sword swings, but in their steadfast commitment to bearing witness, ensuring that truth is not the first casualty of war. They are the modern-day equivalents of those who entered besieged castles, delivering reports from the front lines to a waiting, anxious public. This same timeless courage defines the humanitarian aid worker. Their cargo is not a sealed letter, but life-saving supplies and medical expertise. They travel into regions shattered by natural disaster or torn apart by violence, guided by a duty to alleviate suffering rather than to deliver a command. The logistical hurdles they overcome, navigating ruined infrastructure, negotiating access with unpredictable warlords, and distributing aid under the constant threat of theft or violence, require a level of adaptability and resilience any medieval messenger would recognize. Theirs is a mission built on the same fundamental principle, that a single individual's journey into danger can carry hope and salvation for an entire community. They operate in the same ethical gray areas, often having to make impossible choices about who receives help first, their every decision weighted with profound consequences. And then there are the messengers we never see, who operate in the sprawling digital wilderness. The cybersecurity expert defending a hospital's network from a ransomware attack is engaged in a frantic, silent battle to protect critical data. They are the guardians of the modern castle keep, their enemy not a besieging army but a faceless hacker in a distant country. The ethical data courier, perhaps a whistleblower or a journalist working with sensitive sources, uses encryption and anonymizing tools as their version of a sophisticated cipher and a clever disguise. They work to smuggle truth past the digital gatekeepers of corruption and oppression, knowing that a single misstep could lead not to a dungeon, but to doxing, legal harassment, or worse. Their battlefield is virtual, but the stakes, the protection of privacy, democracy, and human rights, are every bit as real as any medieval struggle for a crown. What connects a 14th century courier to a 21st century aid worker or a cyber activist is not the technology they use, but the core human qualities their work demands. Courage, in its most essential form, is the same whether you're facing down a bandit's knife or walking into a disease-ridden refugee camp. Adaptability is the same mental muscle that allows you to reassess a blocked mountain pass or a suddenly compromised digital dead drop. And the ethical struggle, the weight of the message, and the potential consequences of its delivery is unchanged. The medium has evolved from parchment to pixel, from horse to fiber optic cable, but the human element remains the constant, beating heart of the mission. This bridge from the past to the present invites us to look at our own lives through a different lens. You don't need to carry a king's seal to be a messenger. Every time we choose to share a story of injustice, to stand up for a truth that is inconvenient, or to deliver an act of kindness to someone in need, we are participating in this ancient chain of communication. We are all carriers of something: ideas, values, compassion, knowledge. The question is not whether we are messengers, but what message we choose to carry and how courageously we choose to deliver it. The legacy of those medieval riders challenges us to consider the weight of our own words and actions, and to move through our modern world with the same purpose, integrity, and resolve that defined their perilous journeys. So as our journey along these ancient roads comes to a close, we're left with a profound appreciation for the men and women who were the nervous system of the medieval world. They were far more than just delivery people. They were strategists, actors, cryptographers, and survivalists, all rolled into one. Their stories, whispered from the shadows of history, teach us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to press on in spite of it. It's the ingenuity to turn a simple loaf of bread into a hiding place, the resilience to navigate by starlight when all other guides fail, and the unwavering sense of duty that places a mission above one's own safety. These lessons in resilience and resourcefulness are not locked in the past. they are timeless human truths that resonate just as powerfully in our own challenging times. The chronicler Jean Froissart, who spent his life documenting the 100 Years' War, once wrote that there is no man so poor nor so foolish, but he may have a charge upon his shoulders one day which shall make him a man of mark. This captures the essence of the messengers' story perfectly. They were often ordinary people, from scribes to shepherds, who found themselves carrying an extraordinary responsibility. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that history is not only shaped by the kings and generals who give the orders, but by the determined individuals who ensure those orders are delivered, often at the greatest personal cost. They are the unsung heroes whose names are lost to time, but whose collective courage built the pathways of communication that allowed empires to function and cultures to connect. Now we'd love to hear from you. After traveling with them through all these strategies, which one did you find most impressive? Was it the psychological brilliance of the masterful disguise, the sheer innovation of the animal messenger, or the profound inner strength required to maintain that fortress of mental resilience against all odds? Share your favorite in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of history's most courageous couriers. If you enjoyed stepping into the past with us, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the forgotten stories that shaped our world.